For the women who loved dangerous men and survived. For the men who didn't deserve second chances and got them anyway. The mob boss doesn't forgive, he doesn't forget, and he never, ever lets go. The rain came down the way it always did in Chicago in March. Not politely, not gently, but with the kind of violence that felt personal. It swept off Lake Michigan in gray curtains and slapped against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 43rd floor penthouse like it had a grudge. Enzo Caruso stood at those windows with a glass of Barolo in his hand and watched the city drown. He did this sometimes, stood very still while the world outside moved, while cars crawled below like insects, while the lake churned black and silver, while the city that belonged to him, every street, every corner, every whispered name, continued its heartbeat beneath his feet. He was 34 years old, and he had never once been afraid of the dark. The penthouse was immaculate. That was the only word for it. The kind of immaculate that wasn't clean so much as controlled. The art on the walls chosen by someone whose eye for beauty was also an eye for power. The furniture dark wood and soft leather. The bar stocked with bottles that cost more than most men's monthly salaries. Everything in its place. Everything exactly where he had put it. Enzo Caruso was a man who did not tolerate disorder. The Santoro shipment cleared customs. Marco appeared in the doorway behind him, hands clasped, voice even. Marco Ferretti had been at his right hand for 6 years. He had learned not to knock, not to announce himself too loudly, and never, under any circumstances, to bring bad news without first delivering good news. 14 containers. The paperwork was clean. And the other thing, Enzo said, without turning. A pause. Marco was disciplined, but even disciplined men hesitated when delivering the wrong kind of news to Enzo Caruso. Our contact at O'Hare flagged something. A woman came through international arrivals this afternoon on a flight from Florence. Now Enzo turned. He moved with a stillness that was almost unnatural, the way large predatory animals move, with an economy that suggests they are conserving energy for something more important than you. He was tall, dark-eyed, the kind of face that had been called beautiful before he turned 20, and something harder after that. There was a scar along his jaw, faint and pale now, from a knife fight when he was 19 and still had something to prove. He had stopped needing to prove things a long time ago. Name, he said. Caterina Bellini. Marco said it carefully, as though the name itself might be explosive. She used an Italian passport. 5 years since she entered the States. She came through with... Another pause. She came through with a child, boss. A little girl, 4 years old. The glass in Enzo's hand didn't move. His face didn't change. He was very good at not letting things show on his face. It was one of the many skills that had kept him alive. 4 years old, he repeated, very quietly. Yes. And the child's name? Marco pulled out his phone, looked at the screen. His fingers were steady, but his jaw was tight. Sofia. Sofia Bellini. The rain hammered the windows. Enzo set his glass down on the bar with a precise, deliberate click. He turned back to the window. Below, the city pulsed, indifferent to the thing that had just shifted in the chest of the man who owned it. Caterina. 5 years. 5 years since she had been in his bed. Since she had laughed in the kitchen of this very apartment at 2 a.m. and made terrible coffee and drunk it anyway. 5 years since he had come home from 3 days in New York to find her gone. Every trace of her erased so cleanly it might have been surgical, except for the single note she'd left on the kitchen counter. I'm sorry. Don't look for me, please. He had looked for her anyway. Of course he had. He had turned the world over looking for Caterina Bellini, and she had vanished so completely, so perfectly, that he had eventually been forced to accept that she had simply been better at disappearing than he was at finding. That had been its own particular wound. Where is she now? He asked. Hotel on Michigan Avenue, the Langham, room 1412. She's alone with the child? Appears so. Who knows she's here? Besides me? Marco shook his head. No one. I intercepted the flag before it went up the chain. Enzo nodded slowly. Good. Boss. Marco hesitated. It was the hesitation of a man who had survived in this world by knowing when to speak and when to stay silent, and was currently miscalculating. If the child is, go home, Marco. Enzo, go home. Marco went. Enzo stood at the window for a long time after the door clicked shut. Long enough for the rain to ease slightly, for one of the boats on the lake to blink its light like a signal he couldn't read. Long enough for the arithmetic to finish itself in the back of his mind. The kind of arithmetic that didn't need a calculator, that he had in fact been doing for 5 years without knowing it, every time he thought about Katerina and why she had left. 4 years old. She had been pregnant when she left him. She had looked him in the eyes, those dark eyes with the long lashes that he had spent 6 months mapping like a cartographer who had found something worth dying for. She had looked at him and smiled and said, "I love you, Enzo," and she had been carrying his child. And she had run. He picked up his phone, called the number he'd never deleted. It went to voicemail. Of course it did. "Katerina," he said, and his voice was very calm, very quiet, in the way that his voice became when he was angrier than language had words for. "You're back in my city. I know what room you're in. I know what you brought with you." A pause. "Don't run again. You won't like what happens if you run again." He hung up. Then he poured himself another glass of wine, sat down in the leather chair by the window, and waited for morning. Katerina Bellini was in Chicago, and this time, she wasn't going anywhere. Katerina had not meant to come back to Chicago. She had told herself that 100 times on the flight from Florence, sitting in economy class with Sofia asleep against her shoulder, the child's dark curls fanned out across Katerina's arm like a question she could never stop answering. She had told herself, "This is business, just business. It will be quick, in and out. You don't even have to think about him." She had always been a very poor liar, even to herself. The Langham was a compromise. She couldn't afford the Gold Coast hotels she'd once taken for granted, but she'd needed somewhere safe, somewhere the name carried enough weight to mean security. She'd put it on the card her lawyer had given her, the one tied to the account in Florence that her aunt's estate had funded, and she'd told herself it was fine. It was all fine. Sofia had pressed her nose to the taxi window the whole way from O'Hare and said, "Mama, it's so big, it's so gray. Why is everything gray?" And Katerina had said, "Because it's March, tesoro. It'll be beautiful in summer." And then caught herself, because they wouldn't be here in summer. They absolutely would not. Now it was past midnight, and Sofia was asleep in the second bed, her small body curved into the shape of a comma, and Katerina sat on the edge of her own bed with her phone in her hands and her heart doing something irregular and embarrassing. She had one missed call, unknown number, but she knew. She had always known that if she came back, if she let herself be seen, even for a moment, even on the edges of his city, he would find out. That was the nature of Enzo Caruso. He didn't miss things. He had eyes everywhere, in airports and police precincts and city hall, in the kitchens of restaurants and the back offices of hotels. The city breathed for him. She hadn't listened to the voicemail yet. She was afraid to. Katerina Bellini was 29 years old. She was 5'4", with the kind of dark Italian beauty that people described as classic, and that she had always thought meant nothing special. She had a degree in art history from the University of Florence that she'd finished by correspondence while living in a small apartment in Tuscany with an infant and a revolving cast of fears. She spoke 3 languages. She made decent pasta. She was afraid of spiders and deep water and the particular quiet that Enzo got sometimes, right before he got very, very dangerous. She pressed play on the voicemail. His voice came through like something physical. "Katerina, you're back in my city. I know what room you're in. I know what you brought with you." She closed her eyes. "Don't run again. You won't like what happens if you run again." She sat with that for a long moment. Then she looked at Sofia, her daughter, Enzo's daughter, a fact she had spent 4 years trying not to think about too directly, was sleeping with the complete abandon of small children, one arm thrown over her head, her mouth slightly open. She had his eyes. That was the unbearable thing. Those dark, deep-set eyes that in Enzo were so cold and careful, and in Sophia were nothing but pure, open wonder at everything the world contained. She had his jaw, too, the clean line of it, and his dark hair. She looked almost nothing like Katerina, and everything like a man who didn't know she existed. Until now. I know what you brought with you, Katerina breathed in slowly, breathed out. She had a reason for being here, a real reason, a legal reason, papers that needed to be signed in person because her Aunt Julia's Chicago property couldn't be transferred across an ocean with a notarized letter, according to the very specific terms of the will. 2 days, that was all she needed. 48 hours and she could be on a plane back to Florence and never... Her phone rang. Unknown number again. Same number. She answered before she could stop herself. Enzo. She said it like a statement, like she was confirming the presence of weather. A silence. Not the silence of someone who didn't know what to say, but the silence of someone choosing very precisely what to say first. You listened to my message. His voice was exactly as she remembered it. Low, accented in that way that was half Italian, half Chicago, like two cities trying to claim the same man. Good. How did you know I was here? I know everything that happens in this city. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have for you. Another pause. Come up. Her stomach dropped. I'm sorry? I'm in the penthouse. Come up. Not a request, not quite a command, something in between that was worse than either. It's 1 a.m, Enzo. My daughter is asleep. Your daughter. The 2 words landed like stones. Yes, let's talk about your daughter. Katerina closed her eyes again. The hotel room felt very small suddenly, very contained, like the walls had moved an inch inward. I can't leave her alone. I'll send someone to sit outside your door. I don't want... Katerina. Just her name, just the shape of it in his mouth, patient and dangerous and somehow both. I have been very calm. I am asking you, politely, to come up to my apartment. I am making this request once. She knew what it meant when he made a request once. Give me 10 minutes, she said. She spent 3 of them in the bathroom, looking at her own face in the mirror, dark circles under her eyes from the flight, her black hair pulled back messily, wearing jeans and a soft gray sweater that was 2 years old and had a small stain on the cuff she kept meaning to fix. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had been running for a long time. She knocked on the door between her room and the adjacent one, where a colleague from her law firm's Chicago contact was staying. Elena, I need you to listen for Sophia. Elena, groggy and confused, appeared in the doorway. Is everything okay? Yes, I just need an hour. Keep the doors open between our rooms. She took the elevator to the 43rd floor. The doors opened onto a private foyer she remembered. Marble floors, a single painting she'd once stood in front of for 20 minutes because it was that beautiful. A low console table with white orchids. The orchids were different from the ones she remembered. Everything else was exactly the same. Enzo was standing with his back to her, looking out at the city. He was wearing a dark shirt, open at the collar, the sleeves pushed up. No jacket. She had seen him in this posture 1,000 times, and it still did something involuntary to her breathing. He didn't turn around immediately. Sit down, he said. I'd rather stand. Now he turned. God, he was, she had told herself, in 5 years, that she had exaggerated him in her memory. That the weight of him, the sheer physical presence that he carried like a second skin, had been softened by distance and time into something more manageable. She had been wrong. He was exactly as she remembered, exactly as dangerous, exactly as... You look tired, he said, not unkindly. That was the worst part. I just flew from Florence. With my daughter. The words fell between them like something dropped from a great height. Katerina held his gaze. She had prepared for this. She had rehearsed it. In the small apartment in Tuscany, at 2 a.m, with Sophia teething and the Florentine hills dark outside the window. She had a speech. Several speeches. She had arguments, reasons, explanations that were... She's 4, Enzo said quietly. She would have been born 8 months after you left. You were pregnant when you ran. Enzo. Were you going to tell me? Ever? And the speech dissolved. There are some questions that deserve silence before they deserve answers. Katerina stood in the penthouse she had once thought of as home, stood on the edge of the Persian rug she had picked out herself at an antiques dealer on the near north side, with the city gleaming 43 floors below and Enzo looking at her with an expression that was made entirely of control, and she gave herself one breath. Just one. "I didn't know I was pregnant when I left," she said. "I found out 6 weeks later." He was very still. And then I thought about coming back. She lifted her chin slightly. "I thought about it for 3 months. But you didn't." "No." "Why?" Not a question. Not exactly. The word landed like a coin dropped on a marble floor. Flat, irrefutable, waiting to be answered. Katerina crossed to the window because she couldn't keep standing in the center of the room with nowhere to put her eyes. The city was beautiful from up here, even in the rain, even in the dark. She had always loved Chicago for this, the way it looked at night, like something designed to be looked at, all those lights on the water. "You know why," she said. "I want to hear you say it." "Because your life is dangerous, Enzo." She turned to face him. "Because I had watched 2 of your men get killed in the span of 6 months. Because the Marengo family had put out, I found out, had put out an offer on anyone close to you. Because I had been followed 3 times in a single week, and the 3rd time the man had a gun." Enzo said nothing. "Because I loved you," she said, and hated how steady her voice was. "And loving you was going to get me killed. And when I found out I was pregnant," she stopped. "I couldn't let it get her killed too." The apartment was very quiet. The rain had faded to something softer. "I took care of the Marengo situation," Enzo said finally. "I know. I heard. 3 months after I left." She looked at him steadily. "That was 3 months that I spent thinking you might die, or that someone might come for me to get to you. You should have told me. You would have kept me there. Of course I would have kept you there." And there it was, the thing under the control, the thing she had always known was there, that lived behind his careful voice and his precise movements like a fire behind glass. "I would have put 50 men around you, Katerina. I would have—" "I know." Quiet. "That's exactly what I was afraid of." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he moved, not toward her, but to the bar, where he poured a second glass of wine and held it out without asking if she wanted it. She crossed the room and took it because her hands needed something to do. They stood on opposite sides of the bar, like the most elegant standoff she had ever been part of. "Tell me about her," he said. Her throat tightened. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." And it was so simple, the way he said it, so quiet. For a moment he wasn't the head of the Caruso family, wasn't the man the Chicago Tribune had called the most dangerous figure in organized crime in the Midwest, wasn't the man she had run from. He was just a man who had learned, an hour ago, that he had a daughter. "Tell me everything." So she did. She told him about the tiny apartment outside Florence, where she'd spent the last month of her pregnancy, reading Italian children's books aloud to her stomach. She told him about the labor, 22 hours, which she mentioned with a dry look that he received without flinching. She told him about the first time Sophia had laughed, really laughed, at 8 weeks old, at a mobile of paper birds Katerina had made by hand. She told him about the dark curls that had appeared around 6 months, the eyes that were, she paused here, his eyes exactly, dark and long-lashed and somehow, even in a baby, already assessing. She told him about the first word, no, naturally, the first steps, taken toward a cat on the street, which Sophia had then tried to pick up by its tail. The particular focused intensity that Sophia brought to everything she decided was interesting, which Katerina had recognized immediately and completely. As she talked, something happened to Enzo's face that she had seen happen precisely twice before in the 2 years she'd been with him. The control didn't leave. It never left. But something underneath it shifted, like tectonic plates doing something slow and vast and irreversible. He was listening. That was the thing about Enzo. He had always been the best listener she had ever known. He listened the way some men hunted. "She sounds like you," he said finally. Katerina blinked. "She looks exactly like you." "That's not the same thing." She thought about Sophia in the taxi, nose pressed to the glass, cataloging everything with that fierce, small animal attention. No, she admitted, she does sound like me a little. What is she interested in? Everything. Animals, drawing. She's obsessed with birds right now. She can identify about 30 species from photographs. A pause. She likes music. She makes me play the same songs over and over until she knows all the words, and then she performs them, with choreography, whether you're watching or not. Something almost happened to the corner of Enzo's mouth. She sounds exhausting. She is absolutely exhausting. Katerina felt the smile pull at her own face before she could stop it, and then they were, for just a moment, in the middle of the most complicated night of her life, both very nearly smiling at the same time. And she felt it like a physical thing, the old familiarity of it. She looked away first. I need you to understand, she said, that I didn't come back for this. I came back because my Aunt Julia died in January and left me a property in the Gold Coast. The title transfer requires my physical presence. She set down her wine glass. I will be here for 48 hours, 72 at most. No, she looked at him. No, you won't be here for 48 hours. His voice was back to its usual temperature, even, precise, with that quality of absolute certainty she had always found both irresistible and infuriating. You will stay until we've made arrangements, legal arrangements. Arrangements. She kept her voice steady. What kind of arrangements? The kind that acknowledge the existence of my daughter. He held her gaze. The kind that ensure I have access to her. The kind that ensure she knows who her father is. Enzo. She is a Caruso, he said simply. That is not negotiable. The word Caruso hung in the air between them. 5 years ago, she had loved that name, and feared it in equal measure. She had known what it meant, the weight of it, the legacy of it, the danger of it. She had imagined her child carrying it like a target. She's a Bellini, Katerina said, legally. For now. Don't threaten me. I'm not threatening you. And he wasn't. That was the thing. He was stating. There was a difference, and both of them knew it. I'm telling you what's going to happen. You came back to my city. You brought my daughter to my city. I am not angry with you, Katerina. You sound angry. I am. A pause. I am also other things. He picked up his wine glass again. But my being angry doesn't change the facts. Sophia is mine. I intend to know her. Katerina looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely, and the city was bright and quiet in that way it got after a storm, cleaned and gleaming and just slightly dangerous. I want your word, she said carefully, that none of this touches her. That she lives, that she keeps living, the life she has, in Florence, with me. He studied her. I want to meet her. That's not what I asked. No, but that's what I'm saying. He set his glass down. We'll talk in the morning. Go back to your room. Sleep. He turned back toward the window. She's still asleep? Katerina blinked. The shift was so sudden. Yes. Good. He dismissed her with his posture. That particular angle of his shoulders that she had learned, 2 years into their relationship, meant the conversation was over. She had hated it then. She still hated it now. She was halfway to the elevator when he spoke again. Katerina. She stopped. I'm glad you're not dead. The words were quiet, precise. In 5 years I've thought about... It doesn't matter. I'm glad you're not dead. She didn't trust herself to turn around. She pressed the elevator button and left. Sophia Bellini woke up at 6:15 in the morning the way she always did, completely, immediately, and with the total conviction that the world had been waiting for her to open her eyes. Mama, she announced to the hotel room, there's a lake. Katerina, who had slept approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes, opened one eye. It's a very big lake. Sophia was already at the window, pressing both palms flat against the glass, peering down at Lake Michigan with the intensity she brought to most things. Is it the sea? No, tesoro, it's a lake, Lake Michigan. It looks like the sea. I know. Can we swim in it? Not in March. Why? Because it's very cold. I like cold. You don't like cold. You cry when I make you wear a coat. Sophia considered this with the impartiality of a small judge. That's different cold, she decided. That's coat cold. This would be swimming cold. Katerina sat up and looked at her daughter, at the dark curls that had escaped from last night's plates, at the serious little face pressed to the glass, at the 4-year-old certainty with which she assessed everything. Her chest did the thing it always did, the specific expansion that had no word in any of the 3 languages she spoke. Love was too small. Terror was too much. It was both and more. "Come eat breakfast," she said. "Room service?" "Yes." "Can I have eggs?" "You can have eggs." Sophia launched herself from the window with great enthusiasm and climbed onto the bed beside Katerina, burrowing under her arm like a small animal finding a den. For a moment they sat like that, the city enormous beyond the glass, and Katerina pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head and breathed in the particular smell of her, warm, clean, the lavender of Italian shampoo. "What have I brought you back to?" she thought. Her phone had 3 messages, 2 from her attorney, one from a number she didn't recognize, but she recognized the cadence of it, the Chicago area code, and she opened it. "My driver will collect you at 10, both of you. Both of you." She read it twice, the presumption of it, the flat certainty, no question mark, no if that's acceptable, just both of you, as though the matter had been decided in some meeting she hadn't attended. She typed back, "I haven't agreed to anything." His reply was immediate. "Come for breakfast. Nothing more. My building. You know the address." She did, of course. She knew the address the way she knew her own heartbeat, not by thinking about it, but by something older and more involuntary. She sat with the phone in her hands while Sophia narrated a complex story about a duck she had seen in a picture book on the plane. The practical truth was this. Enzo Caruso had learned of Sophia's existence last night. He had taken it, the word she kept using to herself, taking stock of him. He had taken it with a terrifying calm. He had not raged. He had not threatened in any way that was actionable. He had said, "Sophia is mine, and I intend to know her," with the same tone he would use to say, "The shipment clears customs Tuesday." He had made it a fact rather than a demand. She could refuse. She could call her attorney right now. She could cite. She had already been through this in her head at 3 a.m., during the 2-hour window between lying down and sleeping. She could cite the Italian custody arrangement she'd registered in Florence when Sophia was born. She could argue jurisdiction. He would undo it. Whatever she built, he would undo it. Not out of spite, not even necessarily because he was Enzo Caruso with unlimited resources and a legal team that had once successfully argued that a man shooting another man in full view of 6 witnesses was legally ambiguous, but because he was right. She had known he was right, even as she'd said she's a Bellini. She had known it and said it anyway, because she was afraid. "Mama," Sophia was looking at her with the considering expression. "You have your worry face." "I don't have a worry face." "You do. It's this." Sophia arranged her own face into a studied frown, brow furrowed, lips pressed. It was, Katerina admitted privately, extremely accurate. "We're going to go see someone today," Katerina said, "after breakfast." "Who?" And there it was, the moment she had spent 4 years not thinking about. The specific moment where she would have to decide what to say, what shape to put around the truth to make it comprehensible to a 4-year-old. "Someone who's going to be important," she said carefully. "Someone I knew before you were born." "A friend?" "What are you to me?" she thought. "What have you ever been?" "Yes," she said, "a friend." The car was black, of course. The driver was a man Katerina didn't recognize, young, expressionless, wearing a jacket that fit the way jackets fit on men who were carrying things they didn't want visible. He held the door for them without speaking. Sophia climbed in and immediately began asking him questions about the car. "Is this the fastest kind? Does it have a screen? Why is the glass dark? Is there a monster outside?" And the young man, to his considerable credit, answered each question with complete seriousness. Katerina watched the city pass through the tinted windows. Chicago in March was still beautiful. It had always been still beautiful in the way that cities were when they were too big and too cold to pretend to be charming, just honest about themselves, all steel and glass and gray water and the occasional brutal wind. She had loved it here. She had been happy here in the years before things went wrong, before the fear accumulated into something unlivable. The building was on the Gold Coast, a narrow tower of black glass and steel that looked as though it had been designed by someone who believed architecture should issue a warning. She remembered standing outside it for the first time, 5 years ago, and thinking, this is exactly what someone like him would live in. She had been 24 and beautiful and stupid with love. The elevator opened directly into the foyer. The orchids were fresh. The apartment smelled of coffee and something warm, actual cooking, which surprised her. Enzo was in the kitchen. This was not what she had expected. He was standing at the stove in a dark shirt and gray trousers, sleeves rolled back, doing something with eggs that smelled extraordinary. He had music on, something Italian, low, something her brain supplied a name for before she could stop it. That song. He always played that song on Sunday mornings. He heard them come in, turned, and then he saw Sofia. Something happened to his face that Katerina had never seen there before. Not the near smile she'd witnessed last night. Not the controlled mask of his professional life. Something that had no name she could find. An opening, a sudden sharp vulnerability, gone almost as fast as it appeared, but there, unmistakably, for the space of a breath. Sophia looked up at him with enormous eyes. "Hello," she said, with the directness of children who haven't yet learned that directness should be rationed. "Hello," Enzo said. His voice was slightly different, just slightly. "Are you making eggs?" Sophia asked. "I am." "I like eggs." She considered him. "Do you have juice?" "I have orange juice." "Okay." She pulled out one of the kitchen stools and climbed up onto it, arranging herself at the counter with the ease of a child who has never once questioned her right to exist anywhere. "I'll have juice and eggs, please." Katerina stood in the doorway of the kitchen and watched Enzo Caruso, who had ordered men's deaths with less expression than he showed reading the morning paper, pour a glass of orange juice for a 4-year-old, and could not, for the life of her, say a single word. Enzo had not slept. He had sat in the chair by the window for 3 hours after Katerina left, and then, at 4 in the morning, he had done what he always did when his mind would not still itself. He had opened his laptop and worked, signing off on transfers, reviewing reports, reading through the legal summary Marco had sent him about the DeLuca situation in Milwaukee. Work was reliable. Work responded to effort and intelligence, and did not produce in him the particular wordless state that he was currently managing. 4 years old. He had, while Katerina was telling him about Sofia, done the arithmetic he'd been avoiding. The dates, the timeline, the way it added up with the completeness of an equation that only had one solution. He had also, at some point in the small hours of the morning, stopped being angry. Not because he wasn't still angry. He was, in the way that certain kinds of anger embedded themselves like splinters rather than burning through and leaving, but because he had discovered, beneath the anger, something larger, something he didn't have a word for in either English or Italian, though he had spent 4 years of a Catholic education learning that some of the most important things had Latin names, and none of them helped. She had been pregnant. She had been afraid. She had run to protect the child. He understood, on a level that had nothing to do with forgiveness, the logic of it. He had always understood Katerina's fear, had understood it even when she was with him, the way she sometimes watched him and looked away, the nights she'd lain awake when he came home late, the specific quality of her silence when she heard things she wasn't supposed to hear, but that inevitably, in his world, happened anyway. She hadn't been wrong to be afraid. She had been wrong to run, but those were different things. He'd made breakfast because doing something with his hands seemed necessary. Eggs a la diavola, not particularly appropriate for a 4-year-old, so he'd adjusted, something simpler. Scrambled with herbs from the container on the windowsill that his housekeeper maintained because she'd told him once that a kitchen without fresh herbs was a kitchen that didn't believe in tomorrow. When the elevator opened and he turned and saw her, this small person who was somehow, impossibly, his, something happened to his chest that he had never experienced before. It was not a comfortable sensation. It felt like a structure he'd spent years building very carefully had suddenly acquired a door. "I have a daughter." She was sitting on the kitchen stool, eating eggs with the focused pleasure of a child who takes food seriously, and she was explaining to him, in a mixture of Italian and English that she switched between without apparent awareness, that her favorite bird was the kingfisher because it was the most beautiful and also the fastest, and also it dives, which she demonstrated by making a diving gesture with her fork that sent a small piece of egg onto the counter. "Sorry," she said, without particular remorse, and picked it up neatly. "Your mother taught you good manners," Enzo said. "Mama says manners are important. She says people use bad manners as an excuse not to listen to you. If you have good manners, they have to listen." A pause. "I don't always have good manners at breakfast. Breakfast is too early for manners." "That's a reasonable position." "What's your name?" she asked, looking up at him with those eyes. His eyes. He glanced at Katerina, who was standing in the doorway, holding her own coffee and looking like a woman who was waiting for an explosion she could see the exact trajectory of, but could not prevent. He looked back at Sophia. "Enzo," he said. "Enzo," she tested it. "That's Italian." "Yes. I'm half Italian. My mama is from Florence, but I was born in Tuscany. Where are you from?" "My family is from Naples." He leaned against the counter. "But I've lived in Chicago most of my life." "Do you know the lake?" "Very well." "Is it cold?" "In March, yes." "I knew it," she said, with great satisfaction, and looked at Katerina. "I told you it would be swimming cold." "You said you liked swimming cold." "I changed my mind." She returned to her eggs. "Enzo," she said, "do you have a dog?" "I don't." "You should get a dog." She looked around the apartment with the assessing eye of someone who intends to make recommendations. "This is a big space. It needs a dog." Katerina made a sound that she covered very quickly. Enzo felt something move in him that he identified, after a moment's consideration, as the thing people described when they used the word charmed. He had not been charmed by someone he could not recall how long. After breakfast, while Sophia discovered the wall of books in the living room and began pulling them out with great efficiency to examine their covers, Enzo and Katerina stood at opposite ends of the kitchen island. "She doesn't know," Katerina said quietly, "that you're her father. I told her you were a friend." He looked at her steadily. "How long did you intend to maintain that?" "I didn't have a plan." She set down her cup. "I had 48 hours and an intention to get on a plane. That's not going to happen." "Enzo, not immediately," he said. I'm not going to make you stay against your will. But I need time." He paused. "I have a daughter I didn't know existed 4 days ago. I need time to—" He stopped, restarted. "I would like to know her. I need you to give me that." Katerina looked at him for a long time. He watched her doing the calculation, weighing fears against facts, rights against reality. She was the same in this way as she'd always been. She thought before she spoke, which he had loved about her and which, right now, was excruciating. "A week," she said finally. 2 weeks. "Enzo, 2 weeks in Chicago, the 3 of us." He watched her expression. "She stays with you. You stay at wherever you like. I won't impose myself. But I want to spend time with her, understand her, get her used to me before—" He stopped again, and this second stop had a different quality, something almost uncertain. "Before she knows." Katerina's expression changed, just slightly. He had always been able to read her face, even the things she thought she was hiding. She had a face that believed in honesty, even when the rest of her didn't. "You're scared," she said, very softly, with something that was not quite astonishment. "I have never been afraid of anything in my life," he said precisely. "I know." She looked at him, and there it was, the thing he'd missed for 5 years, the specific quality of her attention that had always felt like being truly, completely seen. "That's how I know you're scared." Sophia appeared from behind a bookshelf holding a large art book. "Enzo," she announced, "you have a very good book about birds. Can I borrow it?" He looked at his daughter. "Yes," he said, "keep it." The 2 weeks were supposed to be a boundary. They became, as most boundaries do when Enzo Caruso was involved, something else. He didn't crowd them. She had expected him to, had steeled herself in the first days for the full weight of his presence, for the constant oversight, for the feeling she'd had at 24 of living in the center of a very elegant and very inescapable net. But he surprised her. He sent a car in the mornings with no obligation attached. He suggested the aquarium, because, he said simply, she mentioned birds, but fish seemed adjacent, and he met them there rather than collecting them. And he walked beside Sophia while she pressed her face to every tank with her arms spread wide as though she could hug the glass. He was careful, deliberate. He watched Sophia with an attention that was so focused it was almost invisible. She might not have noticed if she hadn't known what to look for, which was him cataloging everything, storing it, building a map of this person who had arrived in his life with perfect, disruptive completeness. She doesn't sit still for very long, he observed on the third day. They were in Lincoln Park, watching Sophia attempt to make friends with a Canada goose that was significantly less interested in friendship than she was. She never has. Katerina had her hands in her pockets. The March cold had softened slightly, the kind of almost warm that Chicago offered in late March, like a very tentative promise. She was moving in the womb constantly. I used to joke that she was practicing for something. What do you think she's practicing for? She considered. Everything. She practices everything. She decided at 3 that she wanted to learn piano, so for 2 weeks she played the same 5 notes over and over until they sounded like actual music. A pause. She's stubborn. Determined, he said. Those are the same thing. They're not. He glanced at her. Stubbornness is refusing to stop. Determination is knowing what you're moving toward. Katerina was quiet for a moment. Across the path, Sophia had given up on the goose and had found a stick and was now doing something highly geometric with it on the ground. You used to do that, she said. Parse words like that. It drove me crazy. I recall. A beat. You used to use imprecise language on purpose to see if I'd correct you. I did not. She stopped, because he was looking at her with the very faint suggestion of amusement that she'd spent 5 years telling herself she'd imagined that no one's face could do something that subtle and land that precisely. Fine, maybe occasionally. You were testing me. I was not. She stopped again, because, fine, she had been. In the early months, when she hadn't known what to make of him, she had been cataloging him the same way she was watching him catalog Sophia now, and the precise language thing had been one of the tests. You noticed. I always noticed. The words sat between them in the gray March air, and she let them, because picking them up and examining them felt dangerous. On the 5th day, Marco appeared. She had known it was inevitable. Marco Ferretti had been Enzo's closest advisor for years, and in Katerina's experience of Enzo's world, Marco was the part that worked the way a transmission worked, invisible when functioning correctly, immediately apparent when something was wrong. He arrived at the aquarium, day 2, materialized at a discreet distance, made eye contact with Enzo, and retreated. He appeared at lunch on day 4, sat with them briefly, and regarded her with the expression of a man who had a great many thoughts he had chosen, wisely, not to share. On day 5, he found her alone. Enzo had taken Sophia to look at the model train exhibit at the Chicago History Museum, a suggestion that had come out of nowhere and that Sophia had received with rapturous enthusiasm, which left Katerina, slightly stunned, sitting on a museum bench with her phone, and the feeling of having been very neatly outmaneuvered. You look like you're calculating exits, Marco said, sitting beside her. Hello, Marco. It's good to see you. A pause. I mean that. She looked at him. Marco was 42, silver at the temples, with a face that was good at keeping its own counsel, but occasionally, in unguarded moments, went surprisingly human. He had, in her years with Enzo, been the closest thing she had to an ally in that world. Not warm, never warm, but honest in a way that a lot of Enzo's people weren't. Is it? She asked. He was not good after you left. Marco chose words like Enzo did, precisely, with weight. Not visibly, not in any way that would look like anything. But I've been with him for 6 years. I know the difference between him and him without. He stopped. You were good for him. He almost got me killed, she said, without heat, just fact. Almost. Marco nodded. The Marengo situation. Yes, he handled it. He told me. What he didn't tell you, probably, because he wouldn't, Marco looked at his hands. When he found out about the contract, he didn't sleep for 4 days. He was methodical, but not calm. There's a difference. He handled it personally. She absorbed this. Why are you telling me this? Because you're here for 2 weeks with his daughter, and then you're going to leave again, and they want you to understand what you're leaving behind. He met her eyes. Not a threat, an observation. I have a life in Florence, Marco. You have an apartment and a legal consultant job, from what I can see. He said it without cruelty. He stopped. He has a very large and very empty life. He runs it well. He's effective. He is, by every measure that our world uses, extraordinary at what he does. A pause. He is also very alone. She thought about Enzo reading to Sofia from the bird book that morning, sitting beside her on the couch, his dark head bent over the pages, his voice doing something slightly careful as he pronounced species names with a precision that made Sofia giggle and say, "Not like that, like this." And she looked away from Marco because her face was doing something she didn't want him to see. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Nothing," he stood. "Just understanding." He left. That evening, Enzo brought Sofia back to the hotel, flushed with happiness about model trains, and stayed for dinner in a way that wasn't quite asking, just remaining, naturally, in the suite's sitting room while she ordered food, and the three of them ate while Sofia explained the entire layout of the train exhibit with diagrams drawn on hotel stationery. And Katerina sat there, watching them, and felt the circle closing. She had almost forgotten how nights went in Enzo's world. She was reminded on day 7, which started as the others had, morning light through the hotel curtains, Sofia's running commentary on the breakfast menu, the black car at 10, and was going ordinarily until 2 in the afternoon, when Enzo's phone rang and his face went to a particular still that she recognized immediately. "Excuse me," he said. He stepped out of the restaurant where they were having lunch, and through the glass she watched him on the phone, the set of his shoulders, the slight angle of his head, the way his free hand wasn't moving, which was the tell, the thing she'd learned in year 1, that Enzo's stillness got more complete when something was wrong. "Mama," said Sofia, who had been carefully dismembering a bread roll, "Enzo has a serious face." "He does. Like your worry face, but different." "What does his face look like?" Sofia considered, with her usual judicial focus. "Like a lion who heard something in the grass." Katerina looked at her daughter, then back at Enzo through the glass. Like a lion who heard something in the grass. She was 4 years old and had identified Enzo Caruso in approximately 7 days. He came back. Sat. "I have to leave for a few hours." He looked at Katerina. "I'd like you to come to the building." "Why?" "Precaution." He said it simply, not alarmed, not urgent, just stated. "Something is being handled. I would prefer you were somewhere I can ensure your safety while it is handled." The old language, the language she'd almost forgotten. Precaution, handled, ensure your safety, smooth and domestic and utterly chilling once you understood what it covered. "What's happening?" she asked. "Nothing that concerns you directly." "Enzo." He looked at her. "Katerina." The same tone. "I need you to trust me for 3 hours. Then it's done and we go back to—" He paused, and the pause was interesting. "To this." She should have said no. She had a list of reasons she should have said no. It was his world, not hers anymore. It was the exact kind of thing she'd left to escape. It was... "Fine," she said. The building had a floor she didn't know. Below the lobby, accessed by a separate elevator with a biometric panel that Enzo's hand opened. A floor that was clean and quiet and completely anonymous. 3 rooms, a kitchen, sofas, and the specific feeling of a space designed for waiting. Marco was there. 2 other men she didn't know. There were no weapons visible, which, she'd learned years ago, meant nothing at all. Sofia found the television immediately and located a children's channel with the instincts of a born navigator and settled into the sofa with the concentrated serenity of a child who has found exactly what she needed. Within 20 minutes, she was asleep. Katerina sat. Marco brought her coffee. She drank it. At some point, 40 minutes, maybe an hour, She heard voices in the hallway, the particular rhythm of a conversation that was being conducted at low volume for reasons having nothing to do with the sleeping child. She heard Enzo's voice. She did not hear anything alarming. She sat and breathed and thought about the specific quality of this, sitting in a safe room in the building of a man she'd run from because something in his world had required her to be made safe, and the thing she felt about it was not what she'd expected to feel. Not fear. Relief, which was its own particular problem. Enzo came in at the 2-hour mark. He looked at Sofia on the sofa. He looked at Katerina. He sat in the chair across from her. "Resolved?" she asked. "Yes." "Anyone hurt?" A pause. "No." Then, with a precision that might have been honesty or might have been kindness, "Nothing you need to worry about." "That's not a full answer." "No." He looked at her steadily. "It's the answer I can give you." She had heard that sentence before, had hated it before, was discovering, to her great annoyance, that she had missed it. Not the content, but the honesty of the limitation, the specific Enzo quality of saying, "This is what I can give you," rather than constructing a comfortable lie. "Are we in danger?" she asked directly. "No." And this he said without the pause, without qualification. "I would not have had you here if I thought you were in danger." She believed him. That had always been the problem with Enzo. She had always believed the things he chose to say. "Sofia's going to wake up and be upset about missing the park," she said. "Then we'll go to the park. It'll be dark soon. There are lights." He leaned back in the chair, and for a moment he looked tired, which she almost never saw. "I'm sorry," he said, "for today." "You don't have to, I do." He looked at his hands. "This is my world. You spent 2 years in it, and you left because it couldn't be kept separate from you. And you were right, it can't be. I can't separate the thing I am from the life around it." He paused. "I want you to know that I understand why you left. Not forgive, that's the wrong word. Understand." The room was very quiet. On the sofa, Sofia made a small sleeping sound and curled more tightly into herself. "I never stopped," Katerina started. "Don't," he said. Quiet, careful. "Not tonight. Tonight I'm just grateful you're here, and that she's here." His eyes moved back to Sofia. "The rest we can do slowly." She thought. Slowly is how you built everything the first time. Slowly was the thing that made it real. She thought, "I am in tremendous trouble." She didn't say either of those things. She finished her coffee, and they sat in the quiet, and outside the city went on being enormous and indifferent and entirely his. 10 days in, Enzo told her about the family. Not the operations. She already knew more than was good for her about those, but the family. The personal architecture of the Caruso name as it existed now in this iteration of Chicago. She had been aware of most of it peripherally during their years together, but peripherally was different from directly, and what had changed in 5 years was that the stakes of understanding it were now a 4-year-old child who had his eyes. They were in his office on the 44th floor, the one that ran parallel to the penthouse and that she had never been allowed in, not once, in 2 years. The fact that she was here now told her something she was still parsing. It was beautiful. Of course it was. Dark paneled walls and a desk the size of a small country, and a view that, on a clear late March morning with the lake showing its first hints of spring color, was extraordinary. She sat in the chair across from his desk, while Sofia occupied the floor with a box of pencils he had produced apparently from nowhere, drawing birds on the back of documents that she hoped were not important. "My family," he said, in the same tone he used for most things, level, considered, as though each word were being weighed before deployment. "Originally Naples, as I told her. My grandfather came to Chicago in 1962. My father inherited the organization when I was 12. A pause. He died when I was 21. "I knew that," she said carefully. "You know the outline." He glanced at Sofia, then back. "What you don't know, what I've never told anyone, including my closest advisors, is that I've spent the last 3 years dismantling specific operations." She went still. What operations? The ones that couldn't survive daylight. He was precise, measured. The trafficking networks my father built in the 90s. The arms trade with the Kozlov group in St. Petersburg. He held her gaze. Not from morality, or not only, from practicality. Those operations drew the wrong kind of attention. They made us vulnerable. And He stopped. They bothered you, she said. A very long pause. Yes. She thought of the Enzo she'd known at 24, the one who'd seemed so certain about everything, so completely himself, as though his world and the ethics of it had been settled before she ever arrived. She thought of the things she'd overheard and looked away from and told herself were not her business. Are you telling me this because of Sophia? She asked. Yes. He folded his hands on the desk. I'm telling you this because she is going to know my name. She already does. You've been careful with it, but she's 4 and she's brilliant, and she will connect things faster than either of us expects. When she does, I want you to know, I want her to know, that the name she carries is not only the thing that frightens people. She looked at him for a long moment. What else is it? It's a name that has kept this city's streets cleaner than they would be otherwise. It's a name that has, in the last 3 years, removed 6 figures who are considerably more violent and less strategic than I am from positions of power in the Midwest. He was very matter-of-fact about this. I'm not asking you to find that admirable. I'm asking you to find it true. Katerina looked at her daughter, who was drawing a kingfisher with enormous concentration and making small sounds to herself. Sophia, she said. Sophia looked up. The man who is letting you use his pencils. Do you know his name? Sophia gave her the look that meant, I already know this. Enzo, she said. His last name is Caruso, Katerina said. Sophia considered this. Enzo Caruso, she said, trying it out. That's a good name. It has a good sound. She returned to her drawing. Can I have a red pencil? Enzo reached into the box and handed her a red pencil. Thank you, Sophia said. He watched her for a moment, and his face did the thing, the opening, the thing with no word. And then he looked at Katerina. I have a lawyer, he said. I want to start the process of legal acknowledgement. Her name... 1 step at a time, Katerina said. Yes, he nodded. 1 step at a time. She uncrossed and recrossed her ankles, and thought about the way 1 step at a time had always been how he worked. Not impatient, not hurrying, but absolutely relentless in the direction he intended to go. I want to tell her, she said. When the time is right. I want to be the one to tell her. Of course. And I want... She paused. I want her to understand that you are not... that she doesn't have to be afraid of you. Something shifted in his expression that she couldn't fully read. Is she? No. She thought about Sophia climbing onto his kitchen stool and demanding juice, ordering him to get a dog, critiquing his pronunciation of bird species. She is categorically not afraid of you. She has never been afraid of anything in her life. She gets that from you. She absolutely does not get that from me. You left your entire life, moved to another country, and raised a child alone without asking anyone for anything, he said quietly. That is not the behavior of someone who is afraid. She opened her mouth to argue and found she didn't have the argument. That afternoon, on the way back to the hotel, Sophia fell asleep in the car again. She did this reliably, motion being the single most effective sedative for her particular wiring. And Enzo sat beside Katerina in the back seat in the dark, windowed quiet. What did you tell her? He asked. About her father. Before. Katerina looked at Sophia, at the sleeping comma of her against the door. I told her that her father lived far away and that he didn't know about her yet. And that was enough for her? She's 4. A pause. She came back to it sometimes. Late at night, or when she saw other children with their fathers at the park, she'd ask questions. Her voice was very steady. She was very good at very steady. I told her that when the time was right, she would know him, that he was someone I had loved very much, and that she had the best of him in her. Enzo was quiet for a while. "What is the best of me?" he said, in her opinion. She looked at him. His eyes were dark and steady, the city moving behind the tinted glass. "The way she goes completely still when something interests her," she said, "like the whole world could wait." She paused. "And the way she means everything she says." He turned and looked out the window, and she watched his profile against the city, and thought that this exact moment, was the thing she had been afraid of. Not him, never exactly him, the way she felt about him. The call came from Marco on a Thursday. "There's a dinner," he said, without preamble. "Saturday night. The Colucci family from New York is in town for a memorial service, and there's a dinner at Caruso's that Enzo is expected to attend. It will be significant." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because he's going to ask you to come." "That's..." She paused. "Marco, that's not..." "I know." A brief silence. "I'm telling you first so you have time to think about it before he asks, so you're not deciding in the room with him." She stood at the hotel window with the phone pressed to her ear and looked at the lake. Day 11. 3 days left of the 2 weeks. The 2 weeks she'd already extended by 2 days without entirely understanding how it had happened. "Why would he want me there?" Marco paused. "Because the Colucci family is run now by Dominic Colucci, who is 36 and has been, let's say, expressing interest in the Chicago territory for 2 years. And Enzo, appearing with a family, with evidence of a life that is settled and permanent and not susceptible to being negotiated away, sends a message. He wants to use us as..." "No." Marco's voice was firm. "He wants you there. The political calculation is real, but it's not the primary reason. I've worked for this man for 6 years. He's not good at asking for things he wants. He will frame it as strategy. I'm telling you now that the strategy is true and also secondary." She hung up, looked at the lake, called her attorney in Florence. When Enzo called at 5, he said, "There's a dinner on Saturday. I'd like you to be there." "With Sophia?" "Sophia can stay with Mrs. Ferretti. Marco's wife. She has 3 children. Sophia will be fine." "What kind of dinner?" "Business, nominally. Important. I would..." A pause that was unusual for him. "I would like you there, beside me." There it was, the thing Marco had said it would be, exactly as he'd said. "What would I wear?" she asked. A longer pause. Then, very carefully, as though he was aware of the significance of the question and didn't want to overplay it. "I'll have something sent." The dress arrived Saturday morning in a black box with no label except the name of an atelier on the Via della Spiga in Milan that she recognized, had always recognized, had passed once as a student and stared into the window and thought someday in the way of very young women with very little money. It was deep burgundy, fitted, floor-length, with an open back that stopped just above the waist, the kind of dress that required you to be confident enough in your body to wear it, and confident enough in yourself to wear it to something. Because a dress like this, at a dinner like this, said things about the woman in it that she should be prepared to have said. She stood in front of the hotel mirror and looked at herself for a long time. Then she put it on. Sophia, in Mrs. Ferretti's very capable hands by 6 o'clock, had assessed the dress with the clear-eyed honesty of a 4-year-old. "You look like a painting," she said, "the kind they have in museums," which Katerina took as the intended compliment. The car collected her at 7:30. Enzo was in the lobby of the restaurant, Caruso's, which she had known about and never been to, which occupied an entire floor of a building on the magnificent Mile, with a private elevator and the kind of quiet that expensive restaurants had, the kind that wasn't silence, but was its absence of the wrong kind of noise. He was in black, a suit that was, of course it was. He turned when she came in, and she watched his face do something that he didn't bother to control, for once. Just for a moment, but she caught it. "You look..." He stopped. "Good," he said, which was the most significant understatement she had heard in years. "You sent a very good dress," she said. "I know your taste." He said it simply. "I always knew your taste." He offered his arm. She took it. Dominic Colucci was exactly what she'd expected. Handsome in a way that was too aware of itself, with the particular confidence of a man who had inherited rather than built. He was 36, and he looked at Enzo with the competitive intensity of someone who had spent a long time positioning himself to want something that belonged to someone else. He looked at Katerina with a different kind of interest. Enzo noticed. She felt it more than saw it. The slight pressure of his hand at the small of her back, the particular quality of attention he paid to the exact angle of Dominic Colucci's gaze, and the way that attention was precise and patient and said, without any words, "Don't." She had forgotten how it felt, to be beside him in this world, to feel the protection of his presence not as a cage but as a force field, the specific quality of being his in this room, among these people, the way it meant something different than it would mean in any other room. She also hadn't forgotten that she'd run from it. Both things were true. Dinner was 6 courses. The conversation was all code, allusions and implications and negotiated niceties that meant things she only half understood, but that she could read in the tension around the table, in the particular careful cheerfulness of the men who worked for Colucci, in the way Marco watched the room from 3 chairs down. "Your daughter," Dominic said, between the 3rd and 4th course, with the easy tone of someone reaching for leverage they'd been saving. "I heard you have a daughter now, Caruso. Recent development?" A perfect pause, 1 beat. "She's mine," Enzo said. Nothing else. Just 2 words, flat and final, with the weight of every wall in the room behind them. Dominic smiled. "Of course." Katerina kept her face perfectly pleasant and thought, this is why he wanted me here. Not to be a prop, not to be leverage, but to be the proof of a thing that required no argument. The presence of a woman beside him who knew what he was, had always known, and was here anyway. The message it sent was the most dangerous kind. The message that said, I am not alone. I have never been alone, and everything I have is permanent. After dinner, in the elevator down, Enzo stood beside her and said nothing until the lobby. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For coming." A pause. "For everything." She looked at him in the lobby lights. In the burgundy dress and the Chicago dark outside the glass and the 2 weeks of careful, slow accumulation around them. "You're going to make this very difficult," she said quietly. "I know," he said. He did not sound particularly apologetic about it. She told her on a Sunday. It was day 15, already 3 days past the original 2-week agreement, and still nothing had been resolved, and everything had shifted in ways that Katerina was still cataloging. The morning was bright, the first truly bright March morning, the kind where Chicago allowed itself to admit that spring was theoretically possible, and they were in the penthouse because Sophia had lobbied loudly for the apartment with the bird book, and neither Enzo nor Katerina had the resources to counter 4-year-old conviction. Sophia was at the window, looking at the lake with a pair of small binoculars that Enzo had produced from somewhere, and presented with the casual straightforwardness of someone who paid attention to things. Enzo was making coffee. Katerina was sitting at the kitchen island, watching him and thinking, today. It had to be today. Not because the circumstances were perfect, they weren't, they couldn't be, but because Sophia had asked her, last night, lying in the hotel bed in the specific dark of approaching sleep, "Mama, is Enzo going to be my friend forever, or just while we're here?" And Katerina had held her breath for a moment and said, "We'll talk about it." And Sophia had accepted this with more patience than usual, which meant she was actually thinking about it. And a Sophia who was actually thinking about something would come back to it, harder, soon. "Sophia," she said, "come sit with us." Sophia appeared from the window with the binoculars still around her neck, climbed onto the kitchen stool with her usual efficiency. She looked between them. She had, Katerina noted, the expression of someone who suspected something was coming. "I have to tell you something important," Katerina said. "Okay," said Sophia. "About Enzo." Sophia looked at Enzo. He was very still. His coffee cup was on the counter, and his hands were flat on the island surface, and he was looking at Sophia with that expression, the opening, the door. "Enzo is your father," Katerina said, clearly, without preamble, because Sophia always responded better to clear sentences than to long approaches. A silence. Sophia looked at Enzo for a very long time. He held her gaze, held it with everything he had, which was considerable. "My father?" Sophia said. "Yes." "Like, my real father?" Not a story father? Your real father, Katerina said. He didn't know about you until recently. He just found out. Sophia's face moved through several expressions with impressive speed. Katerina had expected, she'd prepared for, crying, or rejection, or the particular 4-year-old outrage that sometimes emerged when facts didn't match expectations. She had not prepared for the thing that actually happened. Sophia slid off her stool, walked around the island, and stood in front of Enzo. He came down off his stool immediately and crouched to her level. That instinct, she thought, had come so naturally, and she filed it somewhere tender. Sophia looked at him very carefully, the considering face, the judicial expression. "You have my eyes," she said. Something cracked in his face, just for a moment. "Yes," he said, very quietly, "we have the same eyes. And your hair is like mine." She reached up and touched his hair with the matter-of-fact familiarity of a child who has decided something and is now confirming it. "Mine is curlier." "Yes." "Did you want to find me?" she asked. Direct, unceremonious. "I didn't know you existed," he said. "If I had known—" He stopped, carefully. "I would have looked for you every day." Sophia absorbed this. Then she said, "Are you going to be here now?" "Yes." He said it without qualification, without delay. "I'm going to be here." "Do you know how to do bedtime stories?" A fractional pause. "I can learn." Sophia nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. She turned to Katerina. "Can I go back to the binoculars?" "Yes," Katerina said. Sophia went back to the window. Enzo straightened up slowly. He turned away from Katerina, not in avoidance, she understood, but because he needed a moment, and he was not the kind of man who let moments be witnessed. He stood with his back to her, looking at his coffee cup. She waited. "Thank you," he said, finally, without turning. His voice had something in it she'd never heard before, a rawness. "She's extraordinary," Katerina said. "She was always going to be extraordinary. She paused. "I should have given you the chance to see that sooner. I'm sorry." He turned. His face was composed again, but not completely, and the incompleteness of it, the visible edge where the composure ended, was more intimate than anything she'd seen in 5 years. "She said I have her eyes," he said. "She always saw that," Katerina said. "She just didn't know what it meant." From the window, "Papa, there's a bird on the building." The word, "Papa," arrived in the room like a stone thrown into still water. Enzo's entire face changed, briefly, completely, and Katerina felt her own eyes fill and blinked it back because she was not going to cry in his kitchen. "What kind of bird?" he called. "I don't know the English. Codiroso, red-tail." "A redstart," Enzo said. He walked to the window, stood beside his daughter, and looked at the bird she was pointing at. "They're migrants. They come through in spring." "Are they going somewhere?" "Yes, north." Sophia leaned against his leg with the unself-conscious ease of a child who has decided someone is safe. "Maybe we can follow it," she said. He looked down at her, and Katerina watched him, from across the room, fall entirely and irreversibly. It happened on a Thursday. 14 days had become 20, had become— "We'll leave Sunday," Katerina had said, and then Sunday had become next week. "We need to sort the title paperwork." And the week had become the most ordinary, extraordinary thing she'd experienced in 5 years. Mornings and museums and restaurants, and the slow accumulation of Enzo learning Sophia, and Sophia learning him with the completeness that children bring to new loves. Thursday was when the ordinary ended. She was alone in the penthouse. Sophia had been taken by Enzo and Marco on what Sophia had described, when presented with the plan, as a proper adventure, which in practice meant a tour of the city from the back of a black car, with stops wherever Sophia found interesting, and which Katerina had watched depart with the complicated relief of a woman who needed 2 hours of silence. She had made herself tea and was sitting in the window chair with her phone, working through the title transfer documents that had technically been the reason for the entire trip, when the elevator opened. She stood, turned. The man was not Marco, not any of Enzo's people she recognized. He was in his late 40s, heavy-set, with a face that had been arranged into something that might pass for pleasantness and wasn't. "Miss Bellini," he said, "forgive the intrusion." Her phone was in her hand. Her body had gone through a specific kind of still that she recognized from before, the still of a person who has just understood that the room has become dangerous. "Who are you?" she said. "My name is Santino Vecchi. I work for some people who have an interest in Enzo Caruso." He smiled. "Please don't call anyone. It would be unnecessary." She didn't call. She also didn't move. "What do you want?" "Information." He crossed to the sofa with the unhurried ease of a man who had done this before, many times. "Specifically, I want to know the status of the DeLuca arrangement, the Milwaukee transaction that was supposed to clear in February." He sat. "You've been close to Caruso for... how long is it now?" "I'm not..." She steadied her voice. "I'm not involved in his business." "You were at the Colucci dinner," he said. "You're living in his building, effectively. You're..." A pause that landed like a suggestion. "You have access." "I don't." "I think you do." He leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to do anything dangerous, Miss Bellini. I'm asking you to simply pass on what you hear. Conversations, details, small things." She was very calm. She had been in this room once before, in different geography, a different man, different words, 3 months before she'd left, and she had handled it then by running. She was not going to run now. Her daughter was in this city. "I'm going to need you to leave," she said. "I'd encourage you to reconsider." He glanced at the window. "You have a child. Things become..." "That is the wrong thing to say to me," she said, very quietly. Something in her voice made him recalibrate. He looked at her, really looked, and apparently found something he hadn't expected. "One phone call," he said. "Leave," she said. "Now." He left. The elevator closed. She stood in the silent penthouse for 30 seconds. Then she called Enzo. He was back in 20 minutes, alone. Marco had taken Sophia somewhere. She didn't ask where, didn't need to know, understood that the machinery had already been put in motion. He came in, and she was still standing in the center of the room, which, in retrospect, was strange, but she hadn't been able to decide where to put herself while she waited. He looked at her, read her. It took him approximately 3 seconds. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No, he didn't touch me." She told him everything, precisely, in the order it had happened. She had always been good at this under pressure. The art history degree had trained her in the discipline of close observation and precise description. Enzo listened without interruption. When she finished, he moved. She didn't know where exactly. He was somewhere behind her. She heard the quiet of him doing something controlled, and then he came back around to face her, and his face was the face she hadn't seen since that first night in this room. "Santino Vecchi," he said. "He knew my name," she said. "He knew about the dinner. He knew about the building." "Yes." "Quiet. Dangerous. I know who he is." "He mentioned a child." The words landed. She watched his face. "Specifically?" he asked, and his voice was very controlled, which meant the opposite of calm. "Generally, it was an implication." He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm going to handle this," he said. "I know you are." She met his gaze. "I know. That's not why I'm..." She stopped, breathed. "I was afraid," she said simply. "I'm telling you because I was afraid, and I need you to know what happened." Something shifted in him. He crossed the room, not quickly, deliberately, and stopped in front of her, and looked at her face with the complete attention she had always measured the world against. "You called me," he said. "Yes." "You didn't run." "No," she paused. "I'm not going to run again." He lifted his hand and touched her face, one thumb along her cheekbone, the lightest thing, barely contact. Just confirmation, she thought. Just the fact of her. He said nothing, and she said nothing, and the city moved below, and the old fire they had both been managing for 3 weeks did exactly what old fire does when given enough air. She kissed him, or he kissed her. Later, she wouldn't be able to reconstruct who moved first, only that it happened with the inevitability of something that had never not been going to happen, and that it was exactly as she remembered, and nothing like she remembered, because 5 years had passed, and she was not 24 anymore, and neither was he, and the difference was that now she knew exactly what she was doing. He pulled back first, his forehead against hers. "Not yet," he said, very softly. "Not like this. Not when you're frightened." She breathed. Enzo, when it happens, he said, I want it to be because you want it, not because the room scared you into me. She stood in his arms in the middle of the afternoon, with her heart doing something enormous, and looked at the man she had run from and thought, I understand, now, the difference between fear of a thing and fear of losing it. Okay, she said. Santino Vecchi was dealt with. She didn't know the details, she didn't ask for them, and Enzo didn't offer them, and this was, she recognized with a certain intellectual clarity, the exact bargain she was in the process of making, consciously or not. There were things she would know and things she wouldn't, and the line between them was not drawn by him so much as by her own willingness to live with the knowledge. What she did know. 3 days after the penthouse encounter, Marco appeared at dinner with the particular relaxed quality that meant something had resolved. He looked at Enzo. Enzo nodded almost imperceptibly. The thread was dropped. She chose not to pull it. What she did address, carefully, on the 22nd day, was the question of what came next. They were in the living room after Sophia's bedtime, a routine that had solidified quietly over the past 10 days. Enzo reading the bird book. They were deep into passerines now. Then the lights dimmed. Then the small conversation about tomorrow's plans that were never as small as they sounded. Sophia had asked twice if Enzo could read the story alone, without Mama. And Enzo had looked at Katerina, and she had said go ahead, and stood in the hallway, listening to his voice, low and careful, and slightly uncertain with the story cadence. And it was one of the most unexpectedly devastating things she'd ever heard. He poured wine. She sat on the far end of the sofa, close, but with deliberate space between them that had become its own negotiation, its own language. You're leaving Sunday, he said, not a question. My attorney says the paperwork can close by Friday. She turned the wine glass in her hands. Sophia needs to be back at nursery school. There are nursery schools in Chicago. Enzo, she said it gently, I'm not asking you to decide tonight. He was quiet for a moment. I'm asking you to consider it. Not for me, for her. She's a Caruso, Katerina. I know you've been protecting her from that name. I know why. But she's going to be 17 someday, and she's going to understand what it means. And I want her to know that I was present, from the beginning of knowing. Not a name on papers or a face in a photograph. She thought about Sophia that morning, drawing a city skyline on hotel stationery, putting Enzo's building right at the center. I'm not asking her to grow up in this world, he continued. I'm asking her to grow up knowing the man in it. And me? She looked at him. Direct, because she had always been direct when it mattered. What are you asking of me? He looked at her for a long time. Whatever you can give, he said. I'm not going to demand. You've been very not demanding, she said, with the first dry edge she'd allowed herself. I've noticed. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. You expected demands. I expected you. I've been trying, he said simply, not to be exactly what I am when I want something. And what is that? Relentless. He said it without apology. I am extremely relentless when I want something. I don't stop. I don't adjust. I don't accept the premise that I can't have it. He looked at his wine glass. With you, I'm trying to choose differently, because what I want is for you to choose this, not to find yourself in it because I removed every other option. She sat with that, sat with the particular weight of it, the Enzo she'd been half expecting, the one who would simply arrange the world until leaving was impossible, versus this one, this man who was choosing to be something he'd apparently decided to try. How long would the arrangement last? She asked. If I said 6 months, if I tried Chicago for 6 months, as long as you need. And if, at the end of 6 months, we'll address that at the end of 6 months. He turned to face her fully. I'm not going to bind you to terms that don't account for what happens. I'm asking for the chance to... He stopped. To be worth staying. She looked at him, the careful, still face that she'd spent 2 years learning and 5 years trying to forget and 3 weeks rediscovering. I need to go home, she said. To Florence. I need to pack Sophia's things, close the apartment, say goodbye to... I have a life there, a real one. I need to close it properly. Of course. And I need 3 weeks, alone, to think. A pause. 3 weeks. Yes. And then? She looked at the window, at the city, this city, that was somehow still both his and hers, that she'd carried in her body somewhere deep in all these years away. And then I'll call you, she said. He nodded, just nodded, and didn't push, and she felt the restraint of it like something physical, the weight of a man not being what he was. 3 weeks, he said. Don't call me, she said. Don't send anyone. Don't. I won't. He met her eyes. I told you, I'm choosing differently. She believed him. That was still the problem. Florence in April was the most beautiful thing on earth. She had always thought so, even as a student, even in the gray, early months when she'd arrived from Rome and stood in the Piazzale Michelangelo and looked at the city spread below like something God had arranged specifically to be looked at. The ochre and terracotta and the Duomo in the haze and the hills beyond going green with the particular conviction of the Italian countryside in spring. She had come back to it 5 years ago with a secret and a suitcase and a hollowness she'd thought would kill her, and it hadn't. And the city had given her instead Sofia, and the apartment in the Oltrarno, and a life that was small and true and hers. She was standing on the apartment balcony with her coffee 3 days after returning from Chicago when her neighbor Ginevra called up from the street. You look terrible, in a beautiful way. Thank you, she called back. You were in America? Chicago. Ginevra made the face of someone who has heard of Chicago and formed opinions. And? Katerina thought about Enzo reading the bird book, about Sofia saying papa unprompted and his face cracking open, about a burgundy dress and a man's hand at the small of her back, about the kiss that was stopped before it became something irreversible, about 3 weeks. And it's complicated, she said. Love is always complicated, Ginevra said cheerfully and went away. The first week she spent dismantling the apartment. This was its own kind of archaeology. 5 years of building a life in a specific place, layered into the shelves and walls, in the Italian children's books and the bird prints Sofia had picked at the market, and the small painting by a street artist in the Boboli Gardens that Katerina had bought on a Tuesday afternoon when Sofia was napping and she had been briefly, simply happy. She packed Sofia's things first, with care, because Sofia watched her with the focused attention of someone who understands change, even if she doesn't have the vocabulary for it yet. We're going back, Sofia said. We're going back to Chicago, to be near Papa. Sofia sat with this. Then, is it forever? I think so, yes. Okay, said Sofia, and went back to her drawing. Okay, Katerina thought. If only. She packed her own life more slowly, took stock of what she was leaving and what she was taking, not in objects, but in the other, more important sense, the freedom of it, the specific, unencumbered quality of this life, small and hers, where no one knew Enzo Caruso's name except as something she'd mentioned once and never again. The safety of anonymity, the peace. She sat with all of it. In the evenings, after Sofia was asleep, she sat on the balcony with wine and the Florentine hills and thought about what she was choosing, because this had to be a choice, not a capitulation, not a surrendering to inevitability. What am I afraid of? She asked herself. The answer had changed. That was the thing. 5 years ago, the answer had been the danger, the violence. The world he lives in and what it does to the people around him, that was still true. The world was still dangerous. Santino Vecchi in his penthouse was evidence of that. But the new answer, the one underneath, I'm afraid of loving him that much again and having it break. Which was different, which was survivable, actually, as a fear. Which was the kind of fear that meant she was already in it, had never not been in it, and running had not, in 5 years, managed to remove it. She called her attorney, notified her landlord, called her old professor at the university, who'd been giving her occasional consulting work, and explained that she was relocating. Chicago? Said Professor Marsetti. For a man? For my daughter's father, she said. And also yes. Ah, said Professor Marsetti, with the equanimity of a man who has seen many things. Good luck. On the 17th day, she called, not because the 3 weeks were up. 2 days early, on a Thursday afternoon, while Sophia was with Ginevra's daughter, and the apartment was in boxes, and the balcony was warm with the last of the day's sun. He answered on the second ring. "You said 3 weeks," he said. "I know." She looked at the hills. "I know. I'm calling because—" She stopped. Started again. "I'm calling because I've been sitting here for 2.5 weeks thinking about the right thing to say, and I've realized that I don't have a right thing. I just have the truth." A pause. "Tell me the truth, then." "I love you," she said. "I have loved you since I was 24 years old, and I have spent 5 years trying to stop, and I can't. I ran, and I built a life, and I had your daughter, and I came back thinking it would be manageable, and it isn't manageable. It has never been manageable." She was very steady. "I'm coming back to Chicago. I'm coming because Sophia should know her father, and because you are what I want, Enzo, and I would rather be afraid in the right place than safe in the wrong one." A silence that went on long enough that she felt her heart doing something arrhythmic. "Enzo, I'm here." His voice had something in it. That rawness, that thing she'd heard once before and catalogued. He stopped. And then, without any of the control, without the precision, just plainly, "Thank God." She put her hand over her mouth so the sound she made wouldn't be heard. 2 weeks, she said, when she could speak. "We'll be there in 2 weeks. I'll have the penthouse, not the penthouse, not yet." She thought about it. "A building nearby, something that's mine, where I can have my own space while this is real, while we build it. Whatever you need. And Enzo." "Yes?" "When I get there," she said. "The conversation we didn't finish in the penthouse. I want to finish it." The pause, the specific quality of it. "Yes," he said. "We will." She had not expected to feel it like that, arriving. She had been to Chicago hundreds of times in her mind in the years between. In dreams, and in the particular waking dreams that come at 3 in the morning, when the mind decides to revisit things it has no business revisiting. She had walked these streets in her imagination, and they had been flat, constructed, like sets from a film she'd once been in. The actual city, approaching on the expressway from O'Hare, with Sophia asleep against her shoulder, and the late April light making everything gold and gray, was 3-dimensional in a way memory had failed to replicate. It breathed. The lake appeared, and it was real. Not the lake she'd been constructing for 5 years, but the actual lake, enormous and steel blue and indifferent and home. She had not expected to feel that word. The apartment Enzo had arranged was on the Gold Coast, 3 blocks from his building, 8th floor, with windows that faced east toward the lake, and the kitchen that had been stocked before she arrived. It was large and clean, and it smelled of fresh paint, and someone had put flowers in a vase on the dining table. She stood in the center of it and thought, he remembered I liked flowers. Sophia had explored it in 6 minutes and declared it good, but it needs pictures. Then she had stood at the window and located Enzo's building 3 blocks away and said, "We can wave to Papa. We can wave to Papa." Katerina had to go into the bathroom for a moment. He came at 7, after Sophia was in bed. She had texted him, "Settled in, 7?" And he had texted back a single word, "Yes." He brought wine. She opened the door, and he was standing in the hallway in dark clothes with 2 bottles of wine and the expression of a man who has been waiting for something for 22 days and is now recalibrating his face to not show all of that at once. "You're here," he said. "I'm here." He came in. She showed him the apartment with the slightly awkward tour energy of someone who is trying to establish the domesticity of a situation that is not yet domestic. And he looked at everything with attention and said the view is good, about the lake view. And she put up the bird pictures about Sophia's corner, which she had already decorated with the prince from Florence. They sat on the sofa with the wine and the city outside and the quiet. "How was Florence?" he asked. "Beautiful. Hard to leave." She turned the glass. "You didn't call. You told me not to." "I know." She looked at him. "I'm noting that you didn't. She paused. I'm not used to you doing what I ask. I was always capable of it, he said. I just... A pause. I thought, with you, that wanting was enough. That if I wanted something badly enough, you'd understand the logic of it and stay. He turned his wine glass slowly. I was 29 and not particularly good at learning things the first time. You're 34 now. Marginally better. She almost smiled. Marginally. They sat with the wine and the city and the accumulated weight of 23 days of Chicago and 17 days of Florence and 5 years before that. I want to tell you something, he said. Okay. I looked for you, in the first year. He said it without dramatics. I told you I did, but I didn't tell you how. I turned over every contact in Italy. I had people in Rome, Florence, Milan, Naples. I had someone watching your family's address in Campania for 4 months. He paused. You had left no trace. I know, she said quietly. I was careful. You were extraordinary. He said it like a fact. I have resources that most governments don't have, Caterina. I have contacts in Interpol. I have sources in the Italian Federal Police. You had simply... He stopped. You had simply chosen not to be found, and nothing I had was equal to that. She thought about the lengths she'd gone to. The cash only, the new phone every 6 months, the routing through 3 different cities before landing in Tuscany. The paranoia that had felt excessive at the time and that had apparently been, in fact, exactly calibrated. After the first year, she said, you stopped. I stopped looking, he said. I didn't stop. He stopped. I lit a candle every Sunday at St. Michael's on Dearborn for 2 years. He said this with the flat, almost defiant steadiness of someone sharing something they find embarrassing, not because it's shameful, but because it's exposed. I told myself it was for safety, that I wanted you to be safe wherever you were, and it was that. A beat. And it was also something I needed to do with what I felt about you. She set down her wine glass very carefully. You lit a candle, she said, every Sunday. In a church. I am, despite everything, still Catholic. She looked at him. This man who ran one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the Midwest, who had once told 3 Marengo men that they had 48 hours to leave Chicago and then sent them somewhere else entirely when they didn't, who had never once, in her experience, visibly needed anyone. I'm sorry, she said, simply, completely, without qualification. I'm sorry for taking her from you. I'm sorry for not finding another way. I'm sorry for the 5 years. He looked at her for a long moment. I forgive you, he said, simple and absolute. I want you to hear that clearly. I forgive you entirely. She felt it like rain. He set down his own glass and turned to her, and this time, when he lifted his hand to her face, she didn't think about anything else. Not fear, not the city, not the years between them. She just thought, yes. The oldest, most complicated yes she'd ever felt, and kissed him. This time, no one stopped anything. The name thing happened gradually, and then all at once. Sophia Bellini had been Sophia Bellini for 4 years and approximately 3 weeks, at which point she came home from a morning at Enzo's penthouse. These had become a regular fixture, a specific slot in the week that was as established now as Saturday morning cartoons or Tuesday pasta, and announced, with no preamble, that she had decided her name was Sophia Caruso. Caterina, who had been unloading groceries, stopped. Did someone... No one said anything, Sophia said, with her customary directness. I decided. Papa is a Caruso. I am Papa's daughter, so I am a Caruso. She watched Caterina with those dark eyes. Is that okay? Is that okay? The question of a child who has learned, somewhere in the architecture of her particular parents, that permission matters. Yes, Caterina said. That's okay. Can we make it official? We'll work on it. Good. Sophia climbed onto the kitchen counter, a habit Caterina had given up discouraging, and selected an apple. Papa says it's legal paperwork and it takes a few weeks. I said weeks is a long time, and he said... She adopted, with impressive accuracy, a version of Enzo's measured delivery. Patience is not the absence of wanting, it's the management of it. She dropped back into her own voice. I told him that was a good sentence. Caterina pressed her lips together. What did he say? He said thank you. A pause. He looked happy about it.
She called Enzo that evening. She told me about the name, she said. She told you I agreed? She told me she decided, and you confirmed the legal mechanics. A beat. I want to be clear that I support it. I just want the paperwork to be clean. I have a lawyer working on it, he said. Adoption or acknowledgement. She gets to keep both names if she wants. Or just Caruso. Or Enzo. Yes. You're doing the thing. A pause. What thing? The thing where you've already made 6 plans and you're presenting me with the choice between them as though they're all equivalent when you have a clear preference. A longer pause. The sound of him, she thought, recalibrating. Sofia Caruso, he said. That's my preference. Clear and simple and, she pressed. And permanent, he said. She would be permanently, he stopped. She would be mine, legally, completely, finally. She thought about the word permanently in his mouth and the way it applied not just to Sofia. Yes, she said, Sofia Caruso, let's do it. The legal acknowledgement ceremony, if it could be called that, it was really just a notarized signing at a very expensive law office on Wacker Drive, was attended by Caterina, Enzo, Marco, and Sofia herself, who had dressed in her best blue dress and brought the bird book as what she described as something important to have with you on important days. The lawyer, a woman of 60, with the equanimity of someone who had seen considerably stranger things, presented the documents without comment. Sofia signed her name, a careful, slightly oversized signature she'd been practicing, with extreme seriousness. Enzo signed his. Caterina signed hers. That's it? Sofia asked. Almost, the lawyer said. This needs to be filed. Within 2 weeks you'll receive... So I'm Sofia Caruso now? She said. You will be, officially, yes. Sofia considered this for a moment. Then she looked at Enzo. Okay, she said. Let's go. I want lunch. Marco covered his mouth. Outside, on the Wacker Drive pavement, Sofia took Enzo's hand with the natural ease she'd developed over the weeks. A hand-taking as simple as breathing, the gesture of a child who has established a claim. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. Papa, she said, can we get gelato? It's April, he said. I know. In Chicago. I know. Gelato is for summer. I'm Italian, she said. Gelato is for always. He looked at Caterina over Sofia's head. She shrugged. You asked for this. Fine, he said. Gelato. Sofia pumped her free hand in quiet triumph and walked between them, holding his hand and occasionally swinging it in the way that required full adult participation, and Caterina thought, this is the shape of it. This is what we were building. She had been afraid of this shape for 5 years, afraid of how good it would be, how exactly right, because right things that you lose are so much worse than wrong things. The difference was, she was not planning to lose this. The nightclub opened on a Friday. She hadn't known Enzo had a nightclub. She knew he had business interests. Interests being the word that covered several categories of enterprise. But nightclubs had not been in the inventory she'd constructed. The opening of Noir on Michigan Avenue was apparently an investment and an occasion, and Marco had informed her, with the careful neutrality of a man delivering good news he's not entirely sure how it will land, that Enzo would be pleased if she came. She came. She wore black this time, her own dress, a column of black jersey that was 3 years old and perfect for this. She arranged for Elena from her law contact to stay with Sofia and took the car and arrived to find the Chicago night and light spilling from the club's entrance, and Enzo by the door in a suit that was architectural in its perfection, and the way he looked at her when she appeared that reminded her, with a completeness she found both wonderful and mildly terrifying, of being 24. You look, he said, and stopped. You already used that line, she said. It's still true, he said. She took his arm. The night was extraordinary. This was his element in a different way from the dinner, less political, more purely his. She watched him move through the room, the way people arranged themselves around him,
the particular current of his authority, the way he could make someone feel that a conversation with him was both a privilege and a mild, natural disaster. She had always loved watching him in this element, had always known that the thing that frightened her about him and the thing that drew her were the same thing. She was done pretending otherwise. At 1 a.m., they stood on the roof terrace with champagne and the lake below them, and he said, without preamble, "Move into the penthouse." Enzo, he paused, not as a demand, as a question. Clearly, I'm asking. She looked at the lake. Sophia needs stability. She'd have stability, more stability. She needs her parents in the same building. We're not, she turned to him. We've been together for 6 weeks. We've been together for 6 years, he said, with a gap. She looked at him for a long time. The city was loud and bright and enormous below them. Give me a month, she said. A month, he agreed. May in Chicago. Green finally on the trees, the lake showing its summer face, the city deciding to be beautiful in the uncomplicated way of a city that doesn't need to try very hard when the conditions are right. The threat came on a Tuesday. She was walking with Sophia in Lincoln Park. The goose from March was long gone, but Sophia had found a new project in a pair of mallards that nested near the bridge, and visited them with the regularity and seriousness of a scientist conducting longitudinal research. Katerina was reading a message from her attorney when she felt it. Felt the quality of the attention. The specific way of being watched that she had learned to recognize in the 2 years she'd lived in Enzo's world. A skill she'd thought she'd let atrophy, that apparently had simply been dormant. She looked up without looking like she was looking up. 2 men, 30 yards back, stopping when she stopped, not looking at her, too pointedly not looking at her. She took Sophia's hand. Let's go see the ducks. They're over, I know. Let's go quickly. Sophia read her tone with the acuity she had for tone, and came without argument, which was unusual enough to underscore how concerned Katerina was. She called Enzo. Walking, not stopping, angling toward the more populated section of the park. 2 men, she said when he answered. Behind me, 30 yards, wearing, she described them, efficiently, accurately. Stay in public, he said immediately. Don't go to the parking structure. Go to the... She heard him moving. Go to the cafe near the lagoon. Sit outside. Don't get up until I call you back. Are you coming? Someone is. 2 minutes. A pause, and his voice was quiet and very precise. You're safe. I promise you, you're safe. She found the cafe, sat outside with Sophia in the sun, and ordered lemonade, and tried to be a woman having a normal Tuesday afternoon. Sophia looked at her. Mama, are we in danger? No, she said. We're being careful. Because of who Papa is? She looked at her daughter, 4 years old and already drawing conclusions. Yes, she said, because of who Papa is. Are you okay? Sophia thought about it. Papa keeps us safe, she said, with the certainty of a child who has decided something and defended it in her own mind until it became bedrock. I know that. The 2 men were gone. The car arrived in 4 minutes. Marco got out. Marco, who managed to look like someone attending a pleasant park on a Tuesday while also scanning every angle with the precision of a man who has spent many years in rooms where the wrong angle could be expensive. Car, he said, to Sophia, your father sent gelato. He produced from somewhere a small insulated bag. Sophia's face transformed. Really? Chocolate, he said gravely. Sophia's faith in the universe was confirmed. The men were Colucci's. She learned this from Enzo that evening, not because he volunteered it, but because she asked directly, and he had, apparently, decided that the policy of managed information was not going to work with her. Dominic Colucci, he said, testing, seeing how I respond. To them following me and Sophia? Yes. His voice had a specific quality, not anger, rage, managed at very low temperature, which in Enzo was infinitely more concerning than anger. What are you going to do? Handle it. Enzo, she sat forward. I need more than that. I need to understand. He wants Chicago, he said it flatly. He's been circling the territory for 2 years. I think he thought that the news of you, of Sophia, represented vulnerability, that it showed something he could leverage. Can he? A pause. He doesn't understand what you are to me, he said very quietly. He sees Sophia and thinks, hostage potential, weakness. Another pause. He's wrong. Because? He looked at her with the expression she'd been watching accumulate for 6 weeks, the one that had nothing managed about it, that was simply him, without armor. Because you are not a weakness, he said. You are why I cannot be beaten. She sat with that, turned it over. I'm not going to keep running, she said. I know. Even when it's like this. Even when there are men in the park. She met his eyes. I chose this. I'm choosing it. But you need to tell me things, Enzo. Not everything. I understand there are things I don't need to know. But when it concerns me, when it concerns Sophia, I need the truth. Yes, he said, simply. Yes, you have it. And this thing with Colucci? 3 weeks, he said. It will be resolved. She believed him. She always believed him. She had spent 5 years trying to stop. 3 weeks, she said. He resolved it in 12 days. She didn't ask for details. She moved into the penthouse on a Saturday in May. This was not the dramatic act it sounds like. She had, in the 3 weeks since she'd told herself a month, been gradually, inexorably, making the apartment below unnecessary. Sophia's art was on his refrigerator. Her coffee was in his cabinet. There was a specific drawer that had become the drawer for her things, and then a second drawer, and then a portion of the wardrobe, and then, the Sunday before, she had woken up at 7 a.m. in his bed and looked at the ceiling of the penthouse with the city's early light on it and thought, I already live here. I just need to get my books. The books were the last thing. Marco had organized movers in the way that Marco organized everything, without drama, without visible effort, with the result that by noon on Saturday, the apartment below was empty, and the penthouse had absorbed her life without disruption, which was either a metaphor or just a fact about a large apartment. Sophia supervised. This involved standing in the center of each room after the movers had finished, and assessing with her arms folded and her head tilted slightly, a posture that was, Katerina noticed, with the specific amusement of a woman who knows where things come from, exactly Enzo's posture. The bird prints go here, she told the mover, pointing. Not there. Here. Yes, miss, said the mover, who had been in Enzo Caruso's employ for 8 years and had never been directed by anyone who was simultaneously wearing cat-patterned leggings and holding a stuffed flamingo. Good, said Sophia. She turned to Enzo. Papa, the plant should go by the window. The plant is already by the window. The other window. It needs more light. Enzo looked at the plant, looked at the window, moved the plant. Katerina, standing in the doorway, thought, the circle is complete. She thought, what a strange and perfect thing. She thought, I am going to spend the rest of my life watching this man be moved around his own apartment by a 4-year-old. She thought, good. That night, after Sophia was asleep in the room that had been quietly but completely transformed into hers, bird prints and lavender-scented sheets, and the particular organization that Sophia imposed on every space she claimed, Enzo and Katerina stood at the window together. It was late. The city was a field of lights. The lake was dark and vast and permanent. He put his arm around her. She leaned against him. They had been doing this, the slow accumulation of ordinary contact, the rebuilding of the language of two people who know each other's bodies, for 6 weeks, and each iteration of it had been its own specific thing. This one was different. This one was finally, tell me something true, she said. It was a game they played, once. Long ago, in the early months of the first time around, late at night, in this same window, with the same city. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I have been afraid every day for the last month that you'd change your mind. She absorbed this. That's very true. Tell me something true, he said. She thought, looked at the lake. I told myself, for 5 years, that if I came back and he was still, if you were still, she paused. If I still loved you as much as I had, I'd run again. I'd protect myself. She leaned her head against his shoulder. And I came back, and you were, and I do, and I didn't run. Why? Because, she said, I decided that the version of me who runs from the right thing because she's afraid of it is not the person Sophia deserves for a mother. He pressed his lips to her hair. Just that, the warmth of it. Stay, he said. The word was simple and absolute, and had no legal construction around it, and no managed precision. Just stay. I'm already here, she said. Then stay here, he said. Don't go. I'm not going, she said. I promise. The city moved below them. Somewhere, a boat on the lake blinked its light. The moment had no edges. It opened on both sides, into the past and into something she didn't have a name for yet, but that felt like the shape of a future, wide and dark and full of the right kind of uncertainty. I'm not going. She had run from this city once. She had been afraid and young and right about the danger and wrong about the answer, and she had spent 5 years in a beautiful place, learning the difference between safety and happiness. She knew the difference now. She was not going. Summer came to Chicago the way it always did, without apology, without transition. One day gray and the next fully, opulently present. The lake turned blue. The trees on the boulevard went dense and dark. The city relaxed into itself, the way cities do when the cold stops being something to resist. Sophia Caruso, the name now legal, official, filed with the state of Illinois in a document that Enzo kept in his desk and had, Katerina had noticed, not in a filing cabinet, but in the top drawer, accessible, had opinions about summer. These opinions included, the lake was now for swimming. She'd been right about swimming cold, she announced. It was absolutely fine. Gelato was now a daily requirement, not negotiable. And the botanical garden was worth the drive because of the hummingbirds, which she found to be the most miraculous thing I have ever seen, in terms she repeated so often they became family vocabulary. Family vocabulary. Katerina sat with the words. They fit. Enzo had been... She searched for the right word, as she always did, because imprecise language wasn't something she engaged in on purpose anymore. Present. Not differently present from before, not performing a version of domesticity that cost him something. Just present. There in the morning, coffee made, reading the news at the kitchen counter while Sophia ate and monologued, and he listened with the complete attention he gave to everything that mattered to him. There in the evenings, some evenings, working from the desk in the study, while Sophia did homework at the coffee table, and Katerina read or called Florence, or worked on the consulting job she'd rebuilt with her former professor over video calls. There for bedtime, reliably, the bird book now nearly memorized. He had a life that ran alongside theirs. The operations, the meetings, the particular geography of power that she understood in outline, and by agreement left largely unexamined. She had made her peace with this. Or not peace exactly, more a settlement, a working arrangement with the fact of what he was and what his world contained. She was not naive about it. She was choosing it with open eyes. What she had not expected was the specific quality of being known. She had thought, in Florence, in the abstract, during the 3 weeks, that returning would mean negotiating with the familiar Enzo, the one she'd loved at 24, who had loved her back in the particular, all-consuming way he did everything. She had not expected to find herself, instead, with a 34-year-old man who had spent 5 years in which something had apparently matured, who was capable, not without effort, she could see the effort, of asking rather than assuming, of the second drawer rather than the immediate annexation, of sitting with her uncertainty rather than solving it by force. He was still relentless. That hadn't changed, but the direction had adjusted. "You're watching me," he said, one evening in June. Not accusatory, observational. "I always watched you. What are you looking for?" She thought about it. "The places where you're trying," she said. "The places where this is not your default, where you're choosing it." He looked up from his papers. "You think I'm performing?" "No," she set down her book. "I think there are things about you that don't change and things that do, and I'm learning the difference." She paused. "And them very..." She paused again, because the word was too large for casual conversation, and also precisely the right word. "I'm very moved by it, the things that do." He put down his pen, looked at her across the room in the summer evening light. "I am not a man who changes easily," he said. I know, but He stopped, chose. You matter to me in a way that makes me want to be equal to it. That's not a performance. It's the closest I know how to get to. He stopped again. Being better, she said. Yes, quietly. Being better. The thing she had not told him had been holding, carefully, for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment, which was a slightly absurd exercise because there was no right moment for this kind of thing, only the moment when not saying it became more impossible than saying it. She told him on a Thursday evening in June, with Sophia at Marco's and the penthouse quiet and Enzo in the kitchen making pasta, which he had apparently learned to do at some point in the last 5 years, and that she found, every single time, an unreasonably affecting thing to witness. She sat at the kitchen island and watched him and said, "I'm pregnant." He was still. In the absolute, complete Enzo way of being still. She watched him and counted her own heartbeats. He set down the wooden spoon, turned, looked at her face with an attention that was total, all-encompassing, reading everything. "How long?" he asked. His voice was entirely even. 6 weeks, approximately. He crossed to the island, stood in front of her. His hands came up and held her face, both palms, the most complete gesture of attention she had ever been on the receiving end of. "You're not going to run," he said. Not a question, a verification. "No," she said, "I'm not going to run." Something in his face, the opening, the door, she thought. It's back. It might just be a permanent feature now. And then, "Katerina." "Yes." "Marry me." She looked at him, at the kitchen, at the city beyond the window, at the life she'd been building, piece by piece, one step at a time. "Ask me properly," she said. He looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man who is aware that he is not in a position to argue. He stepped back. He reached into the cabinet above the coffee maker. Why there, she would wonder later, and he would tell her it was the one place in the apartment that was hers alone, a small, private joke, and he produced a ring. Black diamond, of course. Set in platinum, of course. "You had this," she said. "I've had it since March," he said. "Since the day you called from Florence." He looked at her steadily. "I have been waiting for the right moment, and I've concluded that the right moment is now." She looked at the ring, looked at him, looked at the kitchen, this kitchen she'd stood in and laughed in and cried in and come back to. "Yes," she said. The wedding was small. This was a specific victory, and also, she suspected, a negotiated compromise in which Enzo had concluded that small and real was worth more than large and performed, which was how he thought about most things. It was also the safest option, given the world, but she chose to think about it as the preference. September, on the 40th floor of a building on the lakefront, with 16 people and a judge Enzo had known for 20 years, and the best meal she'd ever eaten. Sophia was flower girl. She had rehearsed. She took it extremely seriously. She threw the petals with the focused precision of a child who has decided that if a thing is worth doing, it's worth doing correctly. And then, at the end, she stood beside Enzo, holding his hand, and looked at the proceedings with the satisfaction of someone who has arranged things to their liking. But this chapter is the night before. The night before, Katerina sat in the penthouse bathroom with the apartment quiet around her. Enzo at his hotel, for no reason they could clearly articulate except that the gesture of it felt right, felt like acknowledgement that this was the beginning of something, rather than the continuation of a thing already underway, and looked at herself in the mirror. 29 years old. Almost 30. Dark-haired and slightly sleep-deprived, and very, very far from the girl who had left this city 5 years ago with an impossible secret. Sophia was asleep. The baby was a beginning, 10 weeks, a flutter of something new in a body still adjusting. The city was quiet outside. She thought, what did you think your life would be? She had thought, at 24, that loving Enzo Caruso would be something she survived and moved past, that it would be the large, consuming, dangerous love of early adulthood that you carry with you as a lesson rather than a destination. She had thought the lesson was about her own judgment, about the type she was drawn to, about the particular way her heart had always found the most complicated available option and called it home. She had been wrong about the lesson. The lesson was not, You should love someone simpler. The lesson was, love is not the problem. Fear is the problem. And fear, unlike love, can be solved. She had solved it, slowly, over 5 years and 6 weeks, and the geography of Chicago in spring. She had solved it by coming back when she meant to stay an hour and staying 2 months. By calling from Florence before the 3 weeks were up. By choosing, every morning, not to protect herself at the expense of the life she actually wanted. She looked at herself in the mirror. "You're going to marry Enzo Caruso tomorrow," she told herself. The woman in the mirror looked, for the first time in a very long time, entirely unafraid. She called him at midnight. "You're supposed to be asleep," he said. He'd answered on the second ring. "You're supposed to be asleep. I was thinking." "About what?" A pause. "You. The usual subject." She could hear in his voice the specific quality of a man lying in a hotel room with his thoughts, the particular texture of quiet that was him alone. "What are you thinking about?" "The night I left," she said. "The note I left you." "I'm sorry. Don't look for me. Please." He recited it exactly, no hesitation. "You remember?" "Every word. Of everything you've ever—" He stopped. "I know that note was— It was the best I could do, at the time. But I've been thinking, for a while, about what I would write now, instead." "And?" She thought about it, looked at the city through the bathroom window. "I'd write, 'I'm coming back. Don't give up. I love you.'" She paused, which would have been equally incomplete, but truer. He was quiet for a moment. "I wouldn't have needed a note," he said. "If you'd said that to my face, I would have built a wall around Florence and waited." That's exactly why I didn't say it," she said, with a laugh that surprised her. He laughed too, the real laugh, the one she'd been collecting since March, each one a small, rare thing. "Yes," he said, I know I—" He stopped. "I'm different now. I need you to know that. Not in the ways that are structural. I am what I am, and I'm not pretending otherwise. But in the ways that—" He paused. "In the ways that concern you." "I know," she said. "I've been watching." "You're always watching." "It's one of my skills." "It's one of the reasons I love you," he said, simply. The word love in his mouth had always been something he deployed rarely and absolutely. And every time she heard it, she felt it land with the same specific weight. "Go to sleep, Katerina." "You too." "I'll see you tomorrow." "You'll see me tomorrow," she agreed. She went back to the bedroom. The city moved below. Somewhere in her daughter's room, Sophia was dreaming, possibly about birds, possibly about trains, certainly about something she found magnificent. The baby was a flutter of new arrival. The ring on Katerina's hand caught the city light. She fell asleep almost immediately. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't dream about running. They got married on a Saturday in September. The ceremony lasted 45 minutes, which was the right length, long enough to be real, short enough not to become something else. The judge spoke with a warmth that was entirely genuine, which surprised her until Marco whispered, during the cocktail hour, that Judge Rennick had been married to the same woman for 35 years and was constitutionally incapable of performing a ceremony without meaning it. Sophia cried. This was unexpected. She had been so composed during the rehearsal, so professional in her pedal throwing, so entirely herself during the pre-ceremony hour when she'd sat with Katerina and helped with the finishing touches on her hair with the focused concentration she brought to things she considered important. But when Katerina came down the small aisle, 16 people, late afternoon light off the lake, the city in September fullness beyond the glass, and Enzo turned and looked at her, Sophia cried. Not quietly, with the full physical commitment of a 5-year-old who has been moved beyond her capacity to contain it. She pressed both hands to her face and made a sound that was equal parts grief and joy, because children feel things in the original language, without the translations into managed emotion that adults accumulate. Enzo, without breaking his gaze from Katerina, held out his free hand. Sophia took it and cried into his side, and he held her, and Katerina arrived at the front of the room with her throat full and her eyes burning, and her heart doing something that had no word in any language she spoke. I told her this was a happy occasion, Enzo said, to the judge, to the room, to no one specifically. It is happy, Sophia said, muffled. That's why I'm crying. Laughter. Real laughter, the kind that changes the weather in a room. Then let's begin, said the judge. She remembered the vows in pieces afterward, not because she hadn't been listening. She'd been listening with everything she had, but because the moments between the words were where the substance was. The way he looked at her when he said, I promise. The way his voice did the thing where it went very quiet and very total. The weight of his hand when he placed the ring on her finger. She had written her own vows. She had been writing them in her head since June, in the same way she had always written important things, not sitting down with intention, but in the margins of ordinary days, on the bus, at 3 a.m, while watching Sophia sleep. She said, I left once. I know what it cost. I know what I took with me and what I left behind. And I know, now, that the courage I thought I was exercising was partly courage and partly error. And I came back not because I had to and not because there was nowhere else to go, but because this is where I am most completely myself, beside you, in this city. She paused. I will not be afraid anymore, not of you, not of this life, not of what loving you requires. I choose this with full understanding and without reservation. I choose you. He said, I have been in my life many things. I have been precise and careful and controlled, and I have been, occasionally, exactly what the worst version of me was capable of. You knew that. You have always known that. You left because of it, and you came back despite it. And somewhere in that space between, in the 5 years I spent not knowing where you were or if you were safe, I became a different version of whatever I am. Not better exactly, but with a better understanding of what I was building it for. He held her gaze. You are what I was building it for. You and Sophia and what comes next. Everything I am and everything I have is yours. I ask only that you stay. I'm staying, she said. Good, he said. The judge smiled. Then by the authority vested in me. The reception was, by necessity and by choice, beautiful. Sophia danced with Enzo. This was, Marco would say later to his wife, that this was the one moment in 25 years of working for and near Enzo Caruso where he saw the man completely undefended. Sophia standing on his feet, held by both his hands, while he moved them across the floor of the 40th floor space with the careful deliberateness of a man learning to dance for the first time, because the only person who'd asked him to was too small to lead. The look on his face. Katerina watched from the edge of the room and held her champagne glass, untouched, because she was still keeping the news to just them and Sophia, not yet ready to share what hadn't fully arrived into form, and thought about the shape of things. 5 years ago, she had stood in this city and made a calculation born of love and fear. She had decided that the most loving thing she could do, for herself, for the child she was carrying, for him, was to disappear. She had been wrong and right at once, which was the specific kind of wrong that life specialized in. And she had come back. She had come back for a real estate closing and stayed for everything. Later, after the guests had gone, and Sophia was asleep in the building on the lap of a very patient woman who worked for Enzo and had been nominated by Sophia as acceptable, they stood at the window, this window, their window, the one that looked out at the lake and the lights and the city that was his and was becoming hers again in a new way, and the night was around them. Tell me something true, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I thought you were the most extraordinary thing I'd ever encountered the first time I saw you. He turned to look at her. I thought that again today. When the first time? She turned to him. I've never asked. Where was the first time? A gallery on the near north side. You were looking at a painting, a Moroni portrait. He paused. You were explaining it to no one, just talking, under your breath, about the quality of the light in the collar. You didn't know I was there." She stared at him. I was working. I was doing research for Professor Marsetti's." "You were wearing a blue coat," he said. "Your hair was down. You had a notepad and you were talking to a painting about the quality of the light in the collar, and I stood behind you for 4 minutes before you noticed me." "You were watching me for 4 minutes?" "I was listening. There's a difference." The faintest echo of the old argument. "You're very precise about Moroni." She laughed. That real laugh. The one she'd been reclaiming over the spring and summer. The one that was only completely hers when she felt completely safe. "You never told me that was the first time." "You never asked." He put his arm around her. "Besides, it seemed important that you thought I was worth knowing before you thought I was—" He gestured, slightly, at the apartment, the city, the general architecture of what he was. "Before you scared me," she said. "Before I scared you." She leaned against him. "For the record," she said, "I thought you were extraordinary the first time I saw you." "You were scared." "Both things were true simultaneously," she said. "They still are." "The fear part," he said. "What does that look like now?" She thought about it, looked at the lake, dark and permanent. "Like the thing you feel when you're very high up, and the view is extraordinary, and you know you're not going to fall, but your body isn't entirely convinced. You feel it, and then you lean forward anyway, because not seeing would be worse." She paused. "That's what loving you feels like. It's terrifying, and I lean forward anyway, because not seeing would be worse." He pressed his lips to her temple, the warmth of it. "I'll catch you," he said, "if you lean too far." "I know," she said. "I know you will. That's the other thing, the thing that makes it bearable." The city moved below. The lake blinked its lights. In the room down the hall, Sophia Caruso was sleeping the sleep of a child who has arranged the world to her satisfaction. Father found, parents married, birds identified, summers of gelato secured. A new sibling coming, not yet announced. A new shape to the family, not yet fully formed, but there, beginning. Katerina had come back to Chicago to sign a real estate document and close an estate. She had found, instead, the thing she had been running from, and the thing she had been running toward, and discovered, not without irony, not without the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from arriving somewhere the long way round, that they were the same thing. She was not afraid of the dark. She was married to it, and it had turned out to be full of light. In the end, it was not the mob boss she had feared. It was the love, the size of it, the way it took up the whole room, the way it would not agree to be safe or small or manageable. She had spent 5 years trying to be safe. She had finally stopped. Chicago, this city that is at once impossible and indelible, where the lake is always there and the cold is always coming and the dangerous men are always in love with someone they can't keep. Until they can. Until they decide that keeping is different from holding. Until the woman comes back and the child has his eyes and the old fire is simply the fire, burning clean. March again. The kind of rain that had always felt personal, sweeping off Lake Michigan in gray curtains, slapping against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 43rd floor penthouse like it had a grudge. Enzo stood at those windows with a glass of Barolo in his hand. This was the same posture, the same window, the same city drowning below in the same March way. 5 years ago, he had stood here, and the world had been orderly and controlled and correct in all the ways that orderly and controlled and correct things are, which is to say, complete in one way and entirely empty in another. Behind him, the apartment was not quiet. Sophia was explaining to her brother, who was 3 months old and not yet capable of responding to explanations, but who received them nonetheless, with the patient bewilderment of an infant being educated, the taxonomy of migratory birds in North America. She had a book. She was pointing at pictures. Luca Caruso, 3 months old, was looking at his sister with the expression of someone who has accepted that the world is very large and very loud, and that his sister is specifically its ambassador. Katerina came to stand beside Enzo. She had the other glass of wine, hers untouched. She'd gone back to wine when the doctor said it was fine in moderate amounts at 6 weeks postpartum, and she'd had approximately 2 glasses since then, because she kept forgetting in the general adventure of Luca's arrival.
She stood beside him and leaned against him and looked at the city. 1 year, she said. Since the ceremony, he said. Longer since... He paused. Longer since you came back. Yes. She watched the rain. Since I came back. From the sofa. Papa! Sophia's voice, commanding. Come look at the flamingo. Luca is looking at the flamingo. I think he likes it. Enzo looked at Katerina. Katerina raised her eyebrows. Your daughter is calling you. He set down his wine, crossed to the sofa, crouched beside it. Sophia held the book with the flamingo photograph very close to Luca, who stared at the pink image with the total concentration of a being trying to understand color. He definitely likes it, Sophia said, with the authority of a confirmed expert. He's a bird person, like me. Like you, Enzo agreed. Papa, Sophia said, settling against his arm, are flamingos Italian? They are not. Could they be? I don't think birds respect citizenship. They should, Sophia said firmly. The best ones should be Italian. Katerina, from the window, pressed her lips together over the thing that wanted to be a laugh and wasn't quite. The rain came down. The city moved below. The lake was exactly where it always was, enormous and gray and present. 1 year. She had come back to Chicago for 48 hours. She was still here. She intended to stay.